Have to prepare. Yeah. All right, good morning, everybody. Why don't we start with getting some prayer requests. We have a little bit of a stomach bug going around, if you know that. Beata has it, and Emma Torres. They've imported that into Texas down there. You're welcome, in case you're watching. All right, what else do we have for prayer requests? Pam.
We got lots of college kids.
We got lots of college kids traveling back, because last week was spring break. Alice, did you have something? Okay. We're going to pray for you anyways, if that's okay. All right, please join me in prayer. Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings you put before us. We're thankful for the opportunity to come to study from your word and to learn and edify and to take it in, to hold it into our hearts so that it becomes a part of us. It becomes of our natural response to things that happen around us, that we can depend on your word and we use it in a facile fashion, that is, and we manipulate it well to be used in the sense that you would have it intended, Lord. Be with us as we study this. May my words be true to the meaning, and may we have great discussion, and may this all be pleasing to you, Lord. We ask for your blessings on those who may be ill, and just give them a speedy recovery. We pray for the multiple college kids we have returning. Ask them to travel safely and wisely, that they can end up being here with us all. And we're thankful. Prayers of thanksgiving for Alice, that she is doing well, and just may she know that she is loved by you and all the brothers and sisters here, Lord. In your Son's holy name we pray. Amen. Okay. We're going to start with just a few readings. So I got Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Let's start with that.
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation.
All right, and who's got Exodus 20?
Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath unto Jehovah thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, the manservant, nor the maidservant, or the cattle, nor the stranger that is within the gates. For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, the sea, and all of them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Okay, so for those of you at home who didn't hear, those readings were Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. So what are we talking about this morning? The Sabbath. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about the Sabbath, and this is it's an interesting subject, and it's very germane about our history and the history of Israel, of course. And there are some misconceptions about it, and there are some ideas about how it impacts us today and how it should impact us or how it shouldn't impact us. And so we're going to look at some of that. So the seventh day of the week, observed from Friday evening to Saturday evening, as a day of rest and worship by the Jews. The seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God, or in some translations, the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So the original Hebrew word for Sabbath, used in Exodus 20, means to rest or to cease work. So, of course, God didn't need to rest, but in that sense, he did rest. He did cease work during creation. So when God says to remember the Sabbath day, this is the first part of what the Sabbath is. And we're remembering that that's when he ceased from his creation. But he also goes on to say, God says to keep the Sabbath holy. So the word holy means what? The holy word holy means to be set apart. So the seventh day was to be set apart. So, the instructions to Israel was, this seventh day is going to be a holy day of God-centered rest. So that's time that's dedicated to the Lord and the relationship of Israel with him. So attention is to be more directed toward God in a way that is more concentrated and focused than on the ordinary days where we have other distractions or other things of that nature. There's lots more descriptions about it, and part of it is in Exodus chapter 31 and verse 12. And in this reading, and the Lord said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. That puts some emphasis on it, right? There's the death penalty for breaking the Sabbath. And we know God was serious about his instruction in that case. And we have biblical stories about people being put to death for that. So, and this whole thing, the Sabbath was kind of foreshadowed earlier in Exodus in 16 when they first started the collection of manna, because on the seventh day, you are not to collect manna. You were supposed to collect a double portion on day 6. So when day 7 came, you were already prepared. So the Sabbath is not just about the need to rest. Importantly, the Sabbath was about the relationship of Israel with God. And for Israel, keeping the Sabbath was a sign of obedience to God's covenant. So that was the story under penalty of death. So is that a command to us today? That's the question we're going to look at here. Who did I give Hebrews chapter 4 to? Luke?
This is Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 through 13.
Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. For we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Although his works were finished from the foundation of the world, for he had somewhere spoken of the seventh day in his way. And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage he said, they shall not enter my rest. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day, today, saying through David so long afterward in the words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fail by the same sort of disobedience. For the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account.
All right.
That's probably a little bit longer than I intended to be, but what he's talking about was that the rest that was promised by God is now conveyed to us in a different sense, and that is Jesus is now our Sabbath rest. Jesus refers to himself as Lord of the Sabbath in multiple readings, and just as entering rest was a weekly command, as was the perpetual sacrifices for atonement of sin, Jesus removes the need for weekly sacrifice and rest. Jesus relieves us from our works to achieve righteousness and to enter into his rest now. So that's a long about way to say that this covenant has been changed, and now Jesus, the rest that we now find in Jesus. So there is no other Sabbath rest besides Jesus. Jesus, he alone satisfies the requirements of the law. He alone provides the sacrifice that atones for sin, and he is God's plan for us to cease from our labor of our own works, that is us, achieving our own salvation, and we dare not reject this one and only way of salvation. And we'll read about that further in John chapter 14, verse 6. And in Hebrews 10, it kind of follows up on that, and it says, "For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come," that's the old covenant law describing about the Messiah, "instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near." So, is the Sabbath now a command to us? That was the question we were trying to answer. For what do we think from these readings? All right, it's a yes or no question, all right? It's a no. It's a big no. Okay, so is it bad to take a specific time to think about God? Of course not. Is it bad to take time off from our labors as we are finite physical beings needing rest? Absolutely not. Is Saturday a bad day to do that? Not at all. But that is not part of our command. And obviously, some people, Jews and even some other Christians, still observe that, and some do it more zealously than others. And I'll give you an example. I was in Israel at one time, and the last bus runs at, wouldn't you know it, 6 o'clock Friday night, and I hadn't got to the bus station in time. No big deal. There'll be another bus. You can sit there as long as you want. There's no bus coming. So I ended up walking all the way back to where I was staying at, which was a long way. And in fact, if you drive your car in conservative neighborhoods, the kids will come out with rocks and throw them at your car because you're not supposed to be driving on the Sabbath. And so they take it pretty seriously over there. Not me, no. Although you can make the argument, well, that's absolutely true, but I stay away from those neighborhoods. Although I do have some stories, by the way. So anyway, okay, so that's what the Sabbath is about. Not a commandment to us, but what we have other commands to live by. So first of all, what part of this was, and what kind of raised this was, did Jesus ever break the Sabbath law? That's the question. Oh, you guys want to arm wrestle over this?
From a technical perspective, no. Never sinned.
What do you think about it?
He healed and did things and caused people irritation.
Is that a Sabbath command, not to irritate people?
He broke their interpretation.
Okay, so let's look at some examples here. One example would be Simon Peter's mother-in-law in Peter's home, Mark in chapter 1. He healed Peter's mother. A man with a withered hand in the synagogue, Mark chapter 3. A man born blind in Jerusalem, John chapter 9. A crippled woman in a synagogue, Luke 13. A man with dropsy at a Pharisee's house on Luke 14. Of course, the big question on that is, right? We know what that is. Apart from this issue of Jesus healing on the Sabbath, what is dropsy? Okay, so you're agreeing with Pete. All right, but back to the big question: what is dropsy? Who knows what dropsy is? I don't know. What I know of dropsy is actually soft tissue edema, and it can be generic. It's most commonly most use it in relation to congestive heart failure. So in congestive heart failure, your pump's not pumping along quite as well as it is, and it's a plumbing issue, and you just get more and more increased back pressure. So the fluid just goes out in your soft tissues. It's dependent, often in the legs and the feet, because that's just gravity doing its thing. So that's dropsy, as far as I know. Okay, but we can move on. Okay, so a demon-possessed man in Capernaum, Mark chapter 1, a lame man by the pool of Bethesda, John 5. These are all individuals Jesus healed on the Sabbath, much to the irritation of some of the people around him. So some believe he broke the Sabbath in order to accommodate the higher law of love. And that seems to be what you were suggesting. Other people saying no. But this viewpoint leaves the impression that the law is sometimes, if not infrequently, antithetical to being loving. It implies that breaking God's law is necessary in order to be loving. And this notion, of course, is contrary to what we read elsewhere in the Bible. And Paul explains in Romans, in chapter 13, verse 8, he says, he who loves another has fulfilled the law. So that's completely opposite, diametric to what we're saying about that. So breaking the Sabbath would have been a sin. So we must ask the question, did Jesus actually break the Sabbath law? And Hebrews 4, chapter 15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has ever been tempted as we, yet without sin. So that's what Pete is saying. So had he broken the Sabbath law, that would have been a sin, and we know he didn't sin, so therefore we can conclude he did not break Sabbath law. So, but we could look at, but we're going to dig down a little bit deeper on this. So, whenever Jesus publicly healed someone on the Sabbath, the Pharisees accused him of breaking the Sabbath law. He said Matthew chapter 12, Mark chapter 3, John chapter 5, and John chapter 9. So, this was a big deal to them, and Jesus' response, at least in one of these times, was that he was working just as his Father was working. An answer that did not appease the religious leaders at the time. We read that in the John chapter 5 version. So not only did Jesus say he was working, he said, well, my Father who's in heaven is working. So he's working now, he's working on the Sabbath. Now he's claiming to be the Son of God. So just irritating him. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. John 5:18. So this is their words, saying that he broke the Sabbath and blaspheming. Their words, and from their perspective, plus or minus the condition of their hardened hearts, that this is what they believed. And however, over time, their perspectives, or the perspective of Israel about the Sabbath had changed. We have the Sabbath as defined by the Mosaic Law, then we have the Sabbath of that day. And so we're talking about that. So by Jesus' time, the religious leaders had added burdensome rules and traditions. And what do we often refer that to as the around the law? We're going to add extra buffers so nobody actually touches the law or breaks the law. Where's the hedge? The hedge. So adding the rules and traditions for keeping the Sabbath, and they had elevated their own rules to the level of God's instructions. Okay, so they had added more and more, and this is, and we see this just as our federal government expands, right? We have a new department here, and they have to justify that they are a department, so they're going to start producing some paperwork, they're going to make some rules, make some regulations, because if they stop doing that, that means they're not necessary, and they'll go away, and they don't want that to happen. So we'd keep on adding more and more and more, simply because it's not that it's a good idea, simply that's how the system kind of works. So this so-called hedge, it was so bad by Jesus' time that when we read about the disciples who picked and ate some heads of grain as they walked through a field, the Pharisees accused them of breaking the Sabbath because they had supposedly been harvesting and threshing grain. We read about that in Luke chapter 6. So they were furious over Jesus' actions because he seemed to break what they believed was sacrosanct in the Sabbath. Yet it was only their Sabbath law he did not keep. Jesus kept God's law, and he had done nothing wrong to violate the Sabbath. So the Sabbath today is still kept, and it must be extremely difficult. And these are some examples of I got from a current Orthodox website. So, for example, Pete alluded to me walking back to Hadassah Hospital would have violated because I could only walk 200 cubits. That's about 3/4 of a mile. At that point, if you walk beyond that, you're now sinning. Okay, so that's that. This is current day. This is not their law. This is actually current day belief. So, turning on or off anything that uses electricity, that's a big no-no. You can't do that. So, if you open the refrigerator door and the light comes on, you can't do that. So they suggest you undo your refrigerator light Friday afternoon so that you don't inadvertently turn that light on. Now, you can use a refrigerator, and it can use electricity because you're not turning it off and on. It's got its own thermostat to make that happen. So if you have lights that you want off Friday night, they have to be on timers. You cannot turn them off. So some things cannot be moved, like a rock or a plant. However, if you use your teeth or an elbow, you can move those things, okay? You're not allowed to carry things because that would be work. So if you had a pen in your pocket, that would be a violation of Sabbath law because you're moving that object from one room to another. If you're chewing gum, that would be a violation of Sabbath law. So a little crazy to us, but clearly these are, Moses didn't have a big thing against gum, as far as I know. All right, we don't read that, but however, that has become more and more added to it. So the prevailing interpretation of the law of Moses at the time, at least among the Jewish leaders, was that the Sabbath law enjoined total inactivity, as if everyone was to sit down and say, bam, we're done, nobody move for 24 hours because it's the Sabbath. So this view is a distortion of God's law on the matter. The law gave the right, even the obligation, to engage in several activities that could be rightly designated as work that did not constitute violation of the Sabbath regulation. So, I don't just say that. Let's look at some examples of that. Okay, so I'm going to read the first example from Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 9. He went down from there and entered their synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" so that they might accuse him. He said to them, "Which of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." The man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. Okay, so Jesus really pinpoints it here. I mean, because they brought the question to him, and rather duck it and ask, something like he does often, he puts the onus on them to justify the question. He really answers it on this case. And so he puts it down. He says, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into the pit in the Sabbath, then that will not hold of it and lift it out?" In verse 11, and Jesus was recalling a directive from the law of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 22 and in Exodus chapter 23, that is your obligation to provide that service in that point. The Mosaic passage's general principle of the cessation of usual work on the Sabbath did not conflict with any number of specific circumstances in which benevolence and compassion were to be expressed. So especially in this kind of agricultural-based society, where a family's survival depends on its farm animals, to expend the necessary effort or work to retrieve the animal from danger was not considered by God to be included in the Sabbath prohibition. And so hence, Jesus stated the logical conclusion of how much more value then is a man than a sheep. Another example. In a rebuttal to the earlier healing of a paralytic man in John 7, Jesus answered them, "I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." So, again, Jesus saying this is righteous judgment, putting love above legalism and man-made tradition. So if day 8 for an infant for circumcision falls on the Sabbath, he is to be circumcised. Yet that is not a violation of Sabbath law. So some people would call that work. And another example would be Jesus was accused of breaking the Sabbath as seen in the grain field incident. And we're going to look at this one a little more closely. So who has Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8? Pete.
At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and eat. But when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he became hungry? He and his companions, how he entered the house of God, and they ate consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? But I say to you that something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not a sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath."
So in this instance, some people may believe the charge leveled against Jesus' disciples by the Pharisees was a scripturally valid charge. They said it was not only on the Sabbath, but it wasn't even their crops they were consuming, right? Hence, the law of love supersedes the covenant law. However, when the disciples picked and consumed a few heads of grain from the neighbor's field, they were doing what was actually perfectly lawful. And we read about that in Deuteronomy chapter 23, where you are to leave the periphery of your field for the sojourner. So working would have been a violation of the Sabbath law. If they had pulled out a sickle and started harvesting grain to carry with them on their journeys, then that would have been a violation. Had they been stealing grain, prohibited from taking from the field, that would have been a sin and also a violation. However, they were strictly picking for the purpose of eating immediately, an action which was in complete harmony with Mosaic law, but that which everyone must eat, as described in Exodus chapter 12, verse 16. But Jesus' response here isn't just saying, well, it's lawful to eat on the Sabbath, and it's lawful to pick from someone else's field, so you're wrong. He doesn't do that. He goes on. You could almost say he was a little bit ticked by this, right? Because he's saying, well, not only am I going to defend my disciples, I'm going to show you why you are wrong and you have a hardness of heart. So he wasn't just saying the Pharisees were mistaken, but he's going to say, you're mistaken and you're a bunch of hypocrites. Okay, so he called attention to the case of David in verses 3 and 4. And if you recall, David was in exile. He was literally running for his life from Saul. And his companions arrived in Nob, tired and hungry. And we read about this account in 1 Samuel 21. And he lied to the priest, because he told the priest, we're on the business of the king, and convinced him into giving his traveling companions the showbread, or the bread of the presence that was legally reserved only for the priests. David violated the law here. Okay? There's no question about that. And Jesus recognizes that he violated the law. But do the Pharisees condemn David for this? No, they love David. All right, they revere him highly. So they're not going to say anything bad about him. So on the one hand, they condemned the disciples of Jesus who were innocent, but on the other hand, they upheld and revered David who was guilty. So their inconsistency demonstrates their insincerity in trying to apply this law and puts them in a poor standing to bring a charge against Jesus and his disciples. So again, the Sabbath law does not imply that everyone was to sit down and do nothing. The law gave the right, even the obligation, to engage in several activities, which might appear to be in violation of the Sabbath. And so specific examples of authorization included eating, circumcision, tending to the basic care of animals, extending kindness or assistance to the needy, and divinely authorized Sabbath activity of the priests. So you think manhandling some oxen and slaughtering them and burning them on the altar and doing all the necessary rites. If you don't think that's work, you could try that sometime, but I'm guessing that's not easy stuff to do. But so it just proved the accusation of the Pharisees brought against Jesus' disciples was false. The Sabbath doesn't say you must do nothing. So, but he didn't stop there. So he said, you're wrong for these reasons, and you're hypocritical. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. That's 12 and 7. So in this verse, Jesus is quoting Hosea 6:6, in which the prophet condemns external, superficial, ritualistic observance of some laws to the neglect of heartfelt, sincere attention to other laws. And in doing so, he's proclaiming the innocence of his disciples. So these Pharisees who confronted Jesus here and multiple other accounts, they're not truly interested in obeying God's law, right? They're not desiring people, I just want to help you lead a relationship with God. That's not their deal. They possess critical hearts, and they were more concerned with scrutinizing people than with the honest, genuine applications of God's directives for the good of Israel. So they were weaponizing the Sabbath law to try to make certain people look bad. Samuel addressed this same attitude shown by Saul in the reading of 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. Okay. Jesus is the one who made all things. We read that in John 1:3 and Colossians 1:16. He instituted the Sabbath day as creator. Jesus referred to himself as the Lord of the Sabbath in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He has the authority to overrule the Pharisees' traditions and regulations that they placed on the Sabbath. And by healing on the Sabbath, Jesus showed God's goodness and revealed the hardness of the Pharisees' heart. Okay, so what we're going to conclude from that is Pam is wrong. Okay, so Jesus did not sin. He did not break Mosaic law, but he certainly slaughtered some of the man-held traditions of that time. Yes? Well, it is within his purview as God to do what he wants. But all Scripture is harmonious, and there's no reason for him to do that. He can work within the boundaries that he himself created to affect his means. So we're gonna call it. We'll give you partial credit. Okay. Yes, Mike. Yeah. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any other questions about this Sabbath issue? All right. We're going to go into this. I don't know if we'd have time, but we're going to do this. Wait, one more thing, and this is not Sabbath related, but it is Sabbath related. So we're going to talk about the first day of the week. Okay? When we hear this sometimes as a criticism, and sometimes we hear it as a point of confusion. And so the phrase, the first day of the week, appears 8 times in Scripture. Matthew 28, verse 1, now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. We hear about it in Mark 16:2. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. We also read in the other gospel accounts in Luke 24 and John 20. So all the gospels record the empty tomb on the first day of the week, which is not our point of contention here. It's just that some people confuse the Sabbath for the first day of the week, the day we call the Lord's Day, Sunday. So years later, following these gospel accounts, Paul wrote to the Corinthian church commanding them to make regular contributions on the first day of the week. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 2. So that that supports the idea that the Christian church was meeting on this day. Acts 20, verse 7. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. So again, here we have Paul. He's assembled with the Christians in Troas on the first day of the week. So based on these scriptural accounts, we assemble on the first day of the week to worship the Lord's Day. And so that's pretty common in Christendom, right? In the denomination world as well, but it's not universal. So, and part of this is from an inadequate review, and I'm not holding myself as a Greek scholar by any means, but I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. An inadequate review of the Greek reveals words Sabbaton in some of these passages, raising the question if we should be assembling for worship on the Jewish Sabbath. It is with a large consensus that this form of the word represents week. So 7 days is Sabbaton rather than the Sabbath, which is thinking of it as a single day. So Jesus once used the term Sabbath in this sense while teaching about the sinfulness of self-righteousness in Luke chapter 18, verse 9. He told a parable of the sanctimonious Pharisee who prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. So this Pharisee, according to Jesus, was saying, I fast twice a week. So that doesn't make sense to say, I fasted twice on Saturday. That wouldn't be a fast, right? That just means he didn't eat between lunch and dinner, and then didn't eat between dinner when he went to bed. So he's saying, but it does make sense if you say he fasts twice a week. So over the 7-day period, I underwent 2 fasts. So, and based on how days are recorded in multiple Talmuds, which are like commentaries, the days of the Hebrew week are positioned in reference to the Sabbath. So the first day of the Sabbath, the second day of the Sabbath, third day of the Sabbath, etc. And it is the first day that corresponds with Sunday. So if the word Sabbaton in passages such as Matthew 28, Mark 16, Acts 20, actually denoted the Sabbath day rather than a period of 7 days, a week, one would expect some of the Bible translations to translate it thusly. However, every major English translation translates the Sabbaton as the first day of Mia Ton Sabbaton as the first day of the week. So, looking some further examples from the resurrection accounts. Mark 16, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go up and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. So the Sabbath was past, and then on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb. So within this context, this one account, they're saying those are 2 separate things. So the Sabbath was over, and the first day of the week had begun. Matthew 28 reads the same. Now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and other Mary went to see the tomb. Thus, the Hebrews do not equate the Sabbath with the first day of the week. The Greek scholars do not translate the term the Sabbath as the first day of the week. Jesus does not equate the Sabbath with the first day of the week. The gospel writers do not equate the Sabbath with the first day of the week. So let's look at what was the early church understanding. Justin Martyr in AD 150 spoke of Jesus as rising from the dead on the first day after the Sabbath. That's in his dialogue with Tropho in the Ante-Nicene Fathers. And he equated this day with Sunday, and he repeats that in his first apology. Ignatius wrote in his letter to the Magnesians, believed to be penned around AD 110, how Christians have come to the possession of a new hope, no longer observing the Sabbath, but living in the observance of the Lord's Day. Around AD 200, Tertullian twice dealt with this matter in Ad Nations, and in his apology, he indicated that the Christians devote Sunday to rejoicing for a far different reason than sun worship. And I include this one because I don't know if any of you read the Da Vinci Code. It was a book I read back in high school, and it was really enthralling. I really liked it, but I thought, man, this guy is a Catholic, and he says he's not an atheist, but the whole book was directing people away from God. I thought that is a really weird thing. And 10 years later, he kind of came out of the closet and said, oh, by the way, I'm a complete atheist. So he was just, I mean, what a devious tool. But apart from that, Da Vinci Code asserts that Constantine changed Sundays to a day of worship to align with pagan sun worship. And that's not true, because Constantine was hundreds of years after Martyr and Ignatius and Tertullian wrote about these things. So just saying that's a complete red herring and just work of the devil. So critics, including the Seventh-day Adventists, ask why Paul preached on the Sabbath. It was Paul's custom to use the Sabbath for preaching, Acts 17:2. Why is that? I mean, we don't worship on the Saturday, so why was Paul in the synagogue worshiping on a Saturday? That's your thought. Well, I think that's a pretty good thought. And I'm going to ask the one person here who has got some gangster DNA in her background. Hello, Jody. What did the reporter say when he went to Willie Sutton and said, why do you rob banks? Oh, come on. You don't know that? He said, reportedly, he said, that's where the money is. Okay, that makes complete sense. That's logic, right? Why was Paul in the synagogues? That's where all the believers were. These were men who believed in God. They fashioned their lives around God. They were worshiping God, but their understanding was complete. They had missed the coming of the Messiah. He had a whole target of 100 or however many men and women were there who just needed better education. It was merely a matter of convenience. Was he worshiping God when they were there? I'm sure he was. But he didn't take Sundays off. Sundays he was meeting with the Christians, worshiping God in the true sense. So he was that's where he could get a lot of people together who were interested in God and instruct them. So that's why he was there. And maybe that's a lesson for us too, right? We're going to be effective evangelists. We can all talk about evangelism, and we can do it right now. We can all have a group hug about evangelism, right? But we're all believers here, okay? So we got to go where the non-believers are, okay? It's like Willie Sutton. We got to go where the harvest is ripe, and that's probably not within this building. So just a thought about that. So the law of the Sabbath passed away with the old law. We read that in Colossians chapter 2, verse 14, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and the whole book of Romans talks about that. So, people can choose to worship on the Sabbath, but it's not equated as being the Lord's Day, because it is not. Our conclusion that Jesus rose from the dead on the first day of the week, and the early Christians gathered to worship on this day, is established fact. Sunday is the first day after the Jewish Sabbath, the first day of the week. Mike. That's a good point. Mike's talking about how blue laws, I think it's more of a kind of Southern thing, or I don't know, maybe it's not just Southern, but so how it kind of shuts down business on Sundays, which has an eerily similarity to the Sabbath, but for different reasons. So, okay, that concludes our lesson. Thank you very much.